Project management is a highly sought after skill, and I'm personally trained within MSP and change management. Now, I'm not currently trained in Prince 2 or PMP. However, I've spent many years within the public sector, namely the NHS, which heavily utilizes Prince 2 methodology and Agile. So again, I'm going to be sharing what I've learned and how I've understood project management. Now, of course, this is useful for the beginner or someone who requires a refresher, especially if you're going to interview or into a new role. So again, sit tight and take notes with this session. Now, project management is really broken down into 4 main key stages. The first is definition, sometimes known as the proposal or scoping. And this is where the whole project starts. You start to shape and define what that project looks like. The second stage is planning. So this is essentially making sure you know from start to finish what is required in order to make sure that the project is a success. The third stage is delivery or implementation. And this is essentially where you deliver on what you've realized or highlighted in the plan, should I say. And the last stage is closing the program. This is where you hand over the information, documentation, and assets to those who will be carrying it out in business as usual or in normal day activities. So let's look at these in closer detail. So the first thing you need to do is scope out the project. And one really good way of doing this is developing some sort of work breakdown structure. Okay, do this in hierarchies where you essentially list out all the different things that need to be done from start to finish. This is usually numbered or bulleted in such a way where it's chronological by nature. And again, this becomes useful because when you start planning and start putting pieces together, you have something to fall back on. Now, when thinking about the scope, you need to think about what is in scope and what is out of scope. And again, typically within the NHS or within the public sector, I've used a project charter or something similar to start this scoping phase. Now, there's one neat framework that you can use to help you think about what is in scope and what is out scope. And this is known as the Moscow method. And Moscow really defines what must we do, what should we do, what could we do, and what we won't do. Okay. And again, this gives you a clear understanding of what is in scope and what is out of scope, what we need to do based on quality standards or policy, and what just needs to be done because it really helps to enrich the project. So think about those things when you're thinking about the scoping stage. The next thing that you need to define is the deliverables. So in this instance, this is talking about what actually needs to be achieved. So this is highlighting the specifications. This is highlighting possibly what policy says needs to be done on maybe a national or local level. This is thinking about what the stakeholders have highlighted in terms of what success looks like, or possibly what the sponsor or the portfolio board says success looks like. And so this is really specifying what delivery looks like, successful delivery looks like. And again, in terms of documentation, as I highlighted, this is looking at specifications, etc., etc. The next thing to look at is timing. And the best way to think about timing is thinking about your future state. Okay. Now, there's a neat tool known as the gap analysis. And in coaching, there is also a tool called wisdom in hindsight. And this is looking at the future state and thinking in terms of a present state. What did you do to get to this level of success, and working your way backwards? And essentially, this is what we're going to do. We're going to look at the key milestones, the key points of achievements or delivery in order for the project to be successful. And so this is highlighting, again, who is likely to be responsible for it, the timescales, etc., etc. So having the milestones set out gives you a strong idea of how long it may take in order for you to achieve X. Of course, this may change depending on different variations and dependencies, etc., etc. But milestones give you a really strong idea in terms of how long it could potentially take, at least in the beginning stages. The next thing to think about is budget. And a heavy part of the budget is going to be down to workforce. And so having some sort of workforce structure in some way is going to be really important in terms of understanding who is required to achieve X. So think about it. Do you need more project managers? Do you need a delivery team? Do you need benefits manager? Do you need a planner? Do you need project officers? What types of individuals do you need in order to deliver the project? So think about this carefully. Think about those people who are going to be involved in the project and write this down. Write this down in a way where it's attributed to different functions that they will play. It's not just workforce that will be associated to the budget. It will also be other things. So there's a great acronym known as SCHEME. So this is thinking about what space is required, what cash or money is required. Of course, we're talking about that now. What help is required, which is the workforce. What equipment is required, what materials are required, what expertise is required, and what systems are required. So that's schemes. So think about schemes when you're developing your budget. And again, this gives you a good idea of how much money you need to spend in order to push this through. And again, you'll see this will become useful when it comes to the business case. The last thing to think about is quality assurance. So when thinking about quality assurance, think about what already exists that you need to satisfy in order to make sure that quality is being upheld. Is there anyone specific who's going to make sure that quality is met? What different controls and measures do you have in place to make sure that quality is upheld? And these are things we'll think about probably in the delivery and or implementation phase. The next part of scope is the business case. So this is really highlighting the rationale or business need for this project. And so you have to have a compelling case and again, good reasons as to why you want this project to go ahead. So this is where you give that rationale, that explanation. You also talk about the costs that are associated to this project, which I previously spoke about, and you clearly outline this stuff. In addition, you want to highlight any benefits to the organization that may be realized from doing this project. Now, of course, you're not necessarily doing this yourself. So when I've done this in the past, I've worked very closely with HR business partners, commercial business partners, business managers, also working with service leads, working with people in finance to make sure that the budgets are on point. So again, this is a collective document. Don't just do this by yourself. Make sure you got the right people working with you in order for you to have the right proposal so that it can be signed off and you can continue to really realize this project. Finally, this is more of a transition phase from scope to planning, but you should start thinking about what sort of planning tools or resources you should have in place in order to make sure that this is a success. So the first thing to think about is some sort of planning tool that helps keep things on track. So this could be a Gantt chart, this could be a schedule, this could be a Kanban board style. It depends what sort of system you use. You may be familiar with Microsoft Project, you may be familiar with Microsoft Excel, possibly you use something like Asana or Notion or Trello. Again, these are all different tools that help you do pretty much similar things. And so with this, again, chart or schedule, this highlights the activities that are required in order for you to achieve X. It also highlights who is allocated to each activity, how long it's going to take, possibly what sort of themes or categories are associated to those different tasks as well. Another thing to think about is resourcing. And one way to do this in a way where it's succinct and defined is having an organizational breakdown structure that highlights the hierarchical areas and structures and roles of the different people who will contribute to the project. In addition to that, it's important to have an accompanying workforce database or sheet that highlights all of the information attributed to each person. So their role, their budget code, how much they cost per month as an example, all these different things and other pieces of detail that make sense for your organization. This will keep things extremely organized, especially when you're trying to understand different elements of your team. Another thing to back this as well is a RACI. So this is responsibility, accountability, consulted and informed. And it's a great way of highlighting, again, those different things. So essentially, when you have a team, you have the team roles at the top and you have the responsibilities on the side, and you highlight in each cell whether that person or role is responsible, accountable, consulted, or informed. And again, it's a neat way of just really knowing who should be doing what. And maybe this is an activity you do collectively as your team starts to grow. Communication is another one. So how are you planning your communication? Again, in change management, they teach you to have some sort of comms plan or comms strategy that allows you to have the right approach towards your stakeholders. Now, you can use this great acronym known as CPIG. So that stands for customers, providers, influencers, and governors. There are different variations of that acronym. But again, it helps you categorize and understand what types of communications are required for different stakeholders. So really think about how can you start to communicate with these individuals, okay? Do you have to have some sort of meeting? Are there any task and finish groups or forums that need to be had? Any one-to-ones to survey and interview these individuals? What sort of things do you need to do at the beginning, at least, to get people engaged and get them on your side so you can all work together to realize the benefits of this project, because it should benefit everyone in some way, shape or form. So think about developing some sort of comm strategy and or plan, and again, work with the right people to enable this to happen. There's also governance. So when it comes to governance, governance is important because it enables you to, again, ensure that you uphold to accountability and quality, and that the actual project is being driven, okay, by the right people with the right thinking. And so with governance, you need things like terms of reference. You also need to understand what sort of meetings are to be had. So is there going to be a board? Are there going to be regular forums or meetings, etc., etc.? You also need to be thinking about how things are going to be managed. So things like document control, and a really good function to help you provide this if you're a, again, senior project manager or program manager, is the PMO. So I'm not talking about portfolio management office or program management office. I'm talking about the project management office. There's loads of different types of PMO. So maybe you can work with them, whether they're embedded or there is a spoke model or central model. Work with the PMO to help you develop some of these documentations, because that's what they're there for. The final thing is to develop some sort of RAID register, just so it's there and ready. But I'll talk more about that in the delivery phase. Now, before I continue, if you're looking for your own personal project management tool to help you stay on track with your life, then I've developed a life navigation system on Notion to help you really keep track of all your different goals. Now, the reason why I love this so much is because it utilizes both left and right thinking. It allows you to have hard planning, but also self-expression as well. So if this is something that you're interested in and you're needing a deeper sense of clarity, control, and confidence in your life, then make sure to grab it via the link below. In addition to that, I'd love to know, what part of the project cycle are you most confident with? Comment below. So now that we've covered the whole scoping phase, the next phase is delivery. So when it comes to delivery, there are certain elements that enable you to make sure that you deliver on point. One of them is reporting. So reporting is a big thing. I used to report on many different things within the NHS and public sector organizations, and reporting is what allows people to understand whether the project is actually being delivered. Now, again, it depends on where you get your data sources and how you gather your data, but think about setting up regular meetings to ensure that the reports are being done. Think about the templates that are being used to ensure that the story from the data is being encapsulated and explained in the right way. Think about, are there any sort of caveats that help to support what the data is trying to tell those who are going to see the data? So data is a really, really big part. And if you understand the data as a project manager, then you're winning, because you're speaking a language that many people don't necessarily understand. So think about reporting cadence, think about templates, think about all those different things. Again, part of this delivery and implementation phase is ensuring that you have the right monitoring and control metrics in place, or systems in place, to ensure the smooth running of the project. Again, to add to that, sometimes the reporting isn't always necessarily hard data. Sometimes it's utilizing things like highlight reports. And this is really giving you a good contextual piece of information, a snapshot of what is happening in different areas of the project. The next thing is risk management, or RAID management. So that stands for risks, assumptions, issues, and dependencies. This is really important because any decisions that need to be made, it needs to be logged, and there needs to be a system for defining how those decisions are going to be taken forward. Usually this is decided via the SRO, really discussions with the program manager and SRO, or project manager and SRO, to ensure what that looks like. There's also issues. So issues are things that are happening right now. So they're a problem right now. So there needs to be a way of noting this stuff and a clear form of escalation to ensure that these issues are resolved. Assumptions are also important to write down because they affect the way we think and the ideologies behind the project delivery. And you've also got risks. So risks are things that haven't happened yet, but could happen. And so you need to be able to note mitigations that could be put in place in order to prevent that risk from being realized. So again, there are standard risk registers that you can create. There are some online, really, really useful ones. A RAG rated one that has a really good system and flow is really important when it comes to risk management. And again, do you have a risk manager to help support you do this? Do you have an officer who can manage the risk for you? Are you doing this yourself? And if so, do you have regular meetings with the different delivery partners or individuals to ensure that risks are being updated on a weekly basis at least? So there needs to be a cadence. You'll realize that meetings are really important in terms of making sure that delivery is actually being met. The next thing is centered around quality. And this is really broken down into things like assurance and control. So in terms of assurance, this is having the right expert, the person with the right know-how, overseeing what is actually happening and making sure that it's done in the right way. So this is looking at how things are being done. When it comes to control, it's really making sure that the right authoritative figure is in place, or the right accountable figure is in place to make sure that things are allowed to be passed through or things are allowed to happen. So again, there will be specific individuals. There may be a quality lead or quality person who checks the assurance. That may be you potentially. And there'll definitely be someone who is acting as the gateway to certain things, whether that's decisions or other systematic things that need to happen. Again, that could be you. That could be another expert. That could be the SRO. So you need to define what this looks like in the governance section in order for this to be functional within the delivery stage. The other thing is team and leadership. So when it comes to your team, you need to be able to set up a cadence to ensure that there is a rhythm of meetings, updates, and progress being checked. This could be done as daily stand-ups. I'm very familiar with those. Maybe it's 15 to 30 minutes in the morning and also in the evening just before the end of the day, or it could just be in the morning. It could be set up, let's say 3 times a week, whatever makes sense for your organization. Also, is there going to be a main weekly meeting where there are more stakeholders involved, where again there is more general information or maybe even more specific information that's shared? With these daily stand-ups, you may be using something like a Kanban board to help you keep up to date with what's happening. So again, things that would be discussed is what's happening with each different person. Are there any actions that need to be updated? How is everyone feeling? There's also a note to be made in terms of making sure that you have one-to-one sessions with people to check on their well-being. Really important to make sure that people have the right level of motivation and morale, because again, if people are not motivated, then they're not necessarily going to be doing the work that is required, and people are going to quiet quit, which is not what we want. We want to make sure that people are supported. So it's important for you as the leader to ensure that you check to see how people are doing. This is going to test your leadership style, and the sort of leadership style that usually works is the transformational style, the style that has both a coaching and mentoring sort of approach, the style that is authentic, the style that again ensures that everyone is doing their job the way they're supposed to be doing, but has well-being at the heart of their actions and behaviors. So think about all of these things when it comes to team and leadership, because this really does define the culture. You also need to think about the people that you're reporting to. And again, that really defines your sort of morale. And so if there are instances where things are not necessarily working well, then you need to find mechanisms and ways to speak to other people, to offload, to think, to construct different sort of like ways of approaching the situation, because whether we like it or not, the culture is defined by the leadership. So find people you can speak to on a regular basis where need be. Another thing to add to delivery is lessons learned. So I remember when I used to work as a commissioner back in NHS England, and I highlighted that it would be important to start lessons learned from the beginning of the season that we were working in. And people kind of laughed like, okay, Mike's being extra again. But then at the end of the season, they realized that there were so many things that they forgot that this lessons learned was really important. So don't take it for granted. Create a table that highlights the lessons learned. Really think about the situation or scenario in which the lesson came from, and think about any sort of mitigations that could be taking place moving forward. You may even want to highlight who mentioned the lesson learned and the date possibly, if you want to. Again, I spoke about stakeholder engagement before, which is really important. In this instance, it's important to make sure that you are consistently talking with people, okay? 80% of your project is going to be based around people management. I would say even 90%. It's all around people. So this is having a mix between informal and formal communication with these individuals. This is understanding what part of CPIG did they fit into. How do you communicate with them? And again, it doesn't have to always be one-to-one. It could be one-to-many. This is where workshops or stand-ups become really important, where you're presenting information to educate, empower, or not necessarily entertain, depending on where you are. But these are the things that you're trying to do so that it's creating buy-in influence, persuasion in the right and positive ways. You want to use the force for good, not for bad. Okay. So think about your stakeholders and connect to them as regularly as you can. Again, I've spoken about change control. So it's really important to make sure that you have a way to, again, control things in the right way. And this will be covered in the governance. I'd also say have some sort of opportunity in your calendar to ensure that you are organized and you have time to think and reflect, plan, and actually implement. Sometimes we're bogged down by meetings galore, but really and truly, we need time to really think and reflect for ourselves, then plan and then execute. So you have to confidently and boldly be in a position where you say, hey, I can't attend this meeting no more, so I'm not going to. And so with that in mind, that gives you a focused mindset. Follow one course until successful. Don't be afraid to do this and explain this to anyone above or below you why you're not attending these meetings. Because if you do attend these meetings, then X is not going to be done. You're not a miracle worker. And again, during these Brexit, pandemic, cost of living years, it has been difficult to uphold a certain level of quality because we're expected to do many things at one time. So just bear this in mind and politely speak to people, but firmly, why you can't do X. The final stage is closing off. And this is essentially where you're focusing on handing over the information or the assets or documents to those who are going to be assuming business as usual or going to be using the service that you've implemented based on the project. And so this is signified when you start handing this stuff over. And essentially, this is really writing down, again, your lessons learned, any standard operating procedures. Maybe you're going to sit down in a couple of meetings to demonstrate what's actually happened and how to operate the service in a specific way. You may be talking very closely to the business change manager who's going to help, again, implement this stuff into everyday activity. But again, amongst all of this different stuff, you need some sort of written confirmation from your SRO or someone who's going to highlight that this project is actually complete and they have come back and said, yes, it is complete and they're happy with everything. And once you have that information, then you can sit back and say, hey, we've done this. Maybe go out with the gang, with the team to really celebrate and acknowledge what has been done. And you move on to the next thing where need be. So again, this is all really important stuff to really notice. And this is what we're moving towards, celebrating successes. Now, again, hopefully this has given you a comprehensive understanding in terms of how to implement a project. Now, of course, all these elements aren't things you necessarily have to do. Okay, there are going to be some things that aren't relevant to you and some things that are, but these are things to bear in mind. I would also recommend that you check out some of my other videos in change management and program management to give you a more sort of like higher way of thinking about these different areas. In addition, if you're looking to get more clarity, control, and confidence in your life, and you need some sort of life management tool or life navigation system, then make sure to click the link below to check out my Notion template so you can use it for yourself. If you're looking to listen to more information around emotional intelligence, career development, and life management, then make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And as always, my friends, understand, reach, and expand. Peace.